Howdy, folks. I'm Colonel Sanders, and you're not. I just realized on TikTok and Instagram, I have very good videos explaining the family history and my relation to Colonel Sanders and all the good stuff. How I'm the last Sanders known in the Colonel's family. Not the last one alive, but the last one in the line that's known to be the last one, if that makes sense. But I don't have that here on YouTube, really, because those are shorts, reels, TikToks, whatever you want to call it. I don't have a long form video explaining it, so I'm going to explain to you how I'm related to Colonel Sanders and all that good happy horse stuff. First off, I'll start off by saying on TikTok, when I first initially told people who I was and why I'm dressing this way and doing what I'm doing, people demanded a DNA test. They demanded the DNA test to prove that I'm related to Colonel Sanders. They demanded it, and they wanted an answer through DNA testing of if I was the last Sanders in the line. I refuse to do that because I've already done that. Not me necessarily, but my family, like my grandpa, my father, my aunt, all of them have done DNA testing for my aunt's own genealogy research. You see, when you go on to family trees online that random people have made, or even other branches of the family have made, but not knowing all the information, there is missing information, there is misinformation, and then there's accurate information. And you have to know what you're looking for. So my aunt is the only one in the family who has done an enormous amount of genealogy work. She's the only one. And her family tree is the most accurate. However, it's not a public tree for everybody. Just people that she shares it with. And she does that because she doesn't want other people to manipulate her tree, and she doesn't want other people to see what's in there and add it to their own, not knowing whether they're actually related or not. She's very careful with making sure things are accurate in the tree. She's very careful with it, and she pays attention to the documents and everything that you do when you do ancestry work. Anyways, she made me a kinship report, which talks about Anthony Edward Sanders' kinship report. And this is all the Sanders in the Colonel's family, direct family line leading up to me. So we have Clarence, Charles, Ed, Anthony, we call him Tony, he's my father, and me. And there's other family around there too, and I'll include some photos here. I just have to add them in, edit them in later. So anyways, I pretty much have this thing memorized. So how I'm the last Sanders in the family line is Colonel Sanders did have a son, but he died 20 years old with no children. His daughters married and their last names changed. Therefore, their kids and their grandkids and great-grandchildren all have different last names than Sanders. Colonel Sanders also had a sister, Violet Catherine Sanders. This is her. She has a lot of family around today, but none of them have the last name Sanders. And when it comes to Catherine, we call her Aunt Catherine. When it comes to Catherine, when you go on the family trees, there's a few sites where they have Violet Lou Cummings listed as the Colonel's sister and Lee Cummings' mother. But Violet Lou Cummings was Violet Catherine Cummings' daughter and Lee Cummings' sister, and the Colonel's niece. And people don't realize this because this side of the family is not talked about that much. Like, honestly, if you think about it, and I'm not meaning any disrespect to anybody, who cares about the Colonel's siblings and their families, right? People want to know about Colonel Sanders and what people see and think as his direct line, which is his children and grandchildren. You don't see documentaries or other videos covering the rest of the family. But he had a sister, and his sister had 2 kids, and those 2 kids had many kids of their own who are multiplying to this day. Then he had a brother, Clarence Edward Sanders, who is my 2 great-grandfather. Clarence had 2 children. One of them was involved with KFC, the other one was not. You had James Wilbur Sanders, who was also a Kentucky colonel. He would be my great-great-uncle. Jim would be my great-great-uncle. And then his brother would be my great-grandfather, Charles Sanders. Charles had 3 daughters and 1 son. The 3 daughters have all family of their own today that are they have grandchildren alive today, but they don't have the last name Sanders because they married off and the last name's changed. Charles' son, my grandpa, Ed, had 2 sons, and only one of his sons had children, and that would be my father, Anthony Sanders. And my father had 2 daughters and 1 son. Now, he has stepsons, but their last names aren't Sanders. I'm his only son, biologically, with the last name Sanders. My little sister, my grandmother, my stepmother have the last name Sanders. My little sister marries and she chooses to change her last name, then that name Sanders goes. But male-wise, I am the last Sanders in the family line to carry the last name on. And that's how I'm the last Sanders in the line. Now, what about extended family? But people didn't know on TikTok that I had done a DNA, or my family has done a DNA test. Nothing has bounced back with anybody with the last name Sanders in our family tree on Ancestry. Nobody. None. Period. Is it possible that there could be distant cousins of mine with the last name Sanders out there? Yes, it's possible. But there would have to be extraordinary circumstances for it to be accurate. I have run into people with the last name Sanders that have all kinds of different stories of how they are related to the Colonel. I have ran into them in person, and I have ran into them online. My grandfather has also ran into them in person. Every single one has been wrong. One guy says that he was the grandchild of Colonel Sanders, and that his last name is Sanders. That's inaccurate because the Colonel didn't have any grandchildren with the last name Sanders. Another one insisted that their family changed their last name to Sanders to carry the family name, and that's inaccurate. They said they'd done DNA testing, and it comes back, well, no, they haven't, because it hasn't bounced back on our records. There were some people who claimed to be Uncle Jim's child, secret love child, that is my age. I'm 26 now, and when this person reached out, they were also 26 years old. They said they were Jim's child, and that he didn't want anybody knowing about him, so it was a secret. That's a lie. Uncle Jim married twice, and he didn't have any biological children with his wives. His second wife, Pauline, he had a stepson. His stepson had a different last name. His stepson is now dead and has no kids. Uncle Jim died in 1989. I was born in 1997. I had to be 26 now. This person who also was 26, admitted to being 26, had to be born in 1997. Uncle Jim died in 1989. In November of 1989. So right there's a lie. People don't do their research and they think that I don't know my own family research. And not a lot of the family does know all the family research. But I do. I know a lot of it. So I know what I'm talking about when I'm talking about it. My last distant cousin with the last name Sanders was Howard Sanders. He was John Alexander Sanders' son. I believe John Alexander Sanders had 2 sons. Both of them, their children, have married off the last name. Howard had daughters, and their last names changed. They married. They had kids. Those kids married, and their last names have changed. Howard died in 1997 and was the last Sanders on record distant related to me. John Alexander Sanders was Colonel Sanders' uncle. He was Wilbur or Wilbert, depending on which ancestry site you're on, who was my 3 great-grandfather, Wilbur Sanders, who died when Colonel Sanders was just 5 years old. Wilbur was on a ladder working on the farm, and he fell and he got injured, and he succumbed to a fever and died from infection when the Colonel was 5, just before Catherine was born. Catherine was born after her father died. But Wilbur had several siblings. One of them was John Alexander Sanders. John Alexander Sanders had kids with the last name Sanders, but circumstances have happened to where the last name has changed, and there's no more Sanders on that line. All of Wilbur's siblings, their children, the last name Sanders either died off or married off. Before that, you want to go to Wilbur's father. Wilbur's father was Cyrus Sanders. Cyrus had many siblings. Cyrus's father had many siblings. And every single Sanders from that time, their children married off the last name or died with no children, and the Sanders name tapered off. When it comes to the Sanders name, we could only trace it back to New Jersey in the mid-1700s with the Sanders name. There are no other records of the Sanders before then, and even then, the last name was Saunders. So at some point between the 1700s and the 1800s, our last name changed to Sanders. I don't know if this was a name change. I don't know if this was a somebody married and the name just changed from Sanders to from Saunders to Sanders. I don't know that. There's no records of it. So one might argue that there's Saunders and Sanders out there that we could be related to. Yeah, you could argue that, but unless they take a DNA test, we won't know. They won't know themselves because there's no records of them being related to us. We won't know, they won't know. Unless they do a DNA test and we get a match on Ancestry or in any of the other websites that do ancestry work with DNA testing. It is the only way that they would know that they are related to us. It is the only way. And that has not happened yet. That has not popped up. So if somebody does, and they want to take a test, and it bounces back, and you see us on your family tree because of the DNA match, so be it. Great. I'll be excited that I wouldn't be the last Sanders. But the Sanders name was Saunders in the early 1700s. So anybody that branched off from those people that aren't who we are now today, that we just listed, and all the family that I know that existed, their last names would be Saunders or something else. It's a very confusing thing. I had somebody come up, they knew the history, but they spelled Jeduthan Sanders wrong. And they were claiming that they were related. Their last name was Sanders. I went to my aunt. We went to the genetically accurate tree. And the ancestors that they had said, and they claimed that they did tests and all this good stuff, it wasn't there. There was no match. And the person that they said that they were offspring of, or ancestors of, Jeduthan Sanders, there were two Jeduthan Sanders. And none of their children matched the names, or their grandchildren matched the names that were given to us. Their last name died off and married off. There's an Enoch Sanders. The names get weirder the further back you go. There's a Leo Sanders. There were all kinds of Sanders in my ancestral tree. But the circumstances to where we get to now, the Sanders name married and died off. It got to a point where there was Harlan Sanders, Clarence Sanders, and Howard Sanders. Uncle Harley had a son with the last name Sanders. He didn't have any kids of his own, unfortunately. And the Sanders name died off with Harlan David Sanders Jr. Clarence Sanders had two sons, and one of them successfully had a kid that had the last name Sanders to carry it on. And they had a kid, and here I am. Howard had daughters, and their last names changed. They chose to change them when they married. Now, the only way, we already discussed how the DNA thing would work. The only way that anybody related to the Colonel would have the last name Sanders not from Clarence's side would be if one of my cousins chooses to change their last name to Sanders. And that's okay if they want to do that. That's their choice to do that. But that's the only other way. We get people that approach us that claim to be the Colonel's grandchildren with the last name Sanders. They claim to be related to the Colonel's brother as with the last name Sanders. And especially when it comes to Clarence Sanders, my great-great-grandfather, I know every single Sanders that have existed from him down to me. Every single one. Boy, girl, whatever they identify as. Every single one, I know them. I know of them. I know them. I know of their history. Because I didn't get to meet my great-grandpa Charles. He died a few years before I was born. But I know of him. Uncle Jim died in 1989. But I know of him. So when people go online and they talk within their communities and brag about this stuff, and nobody knows any better. Nobody knows any better, so they believe them. But now here I am, and I'm not trying to be mean about it. I'm not trying to be boastful or hateful. But what I do online, I make sure that I have my information as accurate as possible. I share the history that I can share. I set records straight on things when people have things wrong. And that includes somebody pretending to be related who is not related and me calling them out for it. Now, some people add the Colonel to their tree from hints on ancestry. They do. They have somebody in their family that has a similar name to one of the ancestors of Colonel Sanders, so they just add them to the tree. Some people make honest mistakes like that. It is possible. It's entirely possible to make a family tree completely made of hints that you don't know whether it's accurate or not that you're related to them. That is entirely possible. And people make an honest mistake of just adding him to the tree and they think it's cool and they share it. Those type of people, when I first initially interact with them, I'm nice about it. And I have a conversation with them on how they are wrong. But if they're right, they need to show me this, this, and this. And if they can't, then they're not related to me. And then I get people who get hateful with me because they don't like being told that they're wrong. Those people I do get a little snippy with. But what I do online is to make sure that I set the record straight on things. And for years, people have pretended to be related to him. For years, people have spread misinformation about him and this family. And I am just here now to, address all of that. People try to discredit me by going online to family trees, even grave family trees. They don't have all the family related to the Colonel that lived, died, and exists today. And they pull those trees up and they're like, hey, right here, you're not related because you're not listed here. Well, I'm not on any of the public trees. My fame is just now starting. It's not a thing that I have own Wikipedia page. The only Wikipedia page I have is the sample one I was editing and making years ago. Somebody hasn't made a Wikipedia page about me. I am not in any of the history books. The only people that are in these family trees are super close related to the Colonel, names that they have heard, so they add it to the tree, and the Colonel himself. You will not find a public tree that accurately shows me, my sisters, my grandfather, his father, his brother. Some of them will, some of them won't. You will not find a tree that shows all the Colonel's grandchildren. You will not find a tree that shows all the Colonel's sisters' grandchildren. Because not all the family wants to be online. Not all the family wants the attention of it. Not all the family wants to acknowledge their relation. Not all the family wants their business out there. And we have to respect that ourselves. So you can't just do a simple Google search and find everybody related to the family and say, no, you're not related because you're not on the Google search. That's not what I do. I actually have the kinship report. I have the family photos. I have the family. And we know our information. I don't do a simple Google search and say, no, you're not related. This entire video is 20 minutes long as of me recording right now. Explains to you how I know what I know. It explains to you how I'm the last Sanders. So, if somebody genuinely doesn't know if they're related to me or the Colonel, I will help them the best that I can with the information I have. That's how John Alexander's family exists today. They all have different last names. I know them now. You have the last name of Place and Curtis. They weren't entirely sure how they were related. They knew that Howard Sanders was their grandfather. They knew that. But they didn't know how Howard was related. But they did have photos that matched photos that I have. They just didn't know who they were. But guess what? Because of our ancestry research that we have done as a family, and because of our photos that we have with the names written on the backs of them, we were able to identify their family member, John Alexander Sanders, and connect the family. We were able to do that for them. I will believe anybody, and I won't dig into it, I won't go deep into it unless your last name is Sanders, but I will believe anybody that says they're related to me that has a different last name, because we have a lot of cousins. Although the Sanders cannot be traced past the past the 1700s, we have other family, such as the Colonel's maternal side. My 3 great-grandmother, Margaret Sanders, who was Margaret Dunleavy. Margaret Dunleavy comes from the Cleggs and many other last names that can be traced way far back. The Dunleavys is a huge family. They were a huge family, and there are a lot of them and a lot of ancestors and distant cousins and direct relatives of the Dunleavys around the world today. Clarence's wife, Bertha Cathcart, who had Charles and James Sanders. She has a lot of family, a lot of cousins. And there's a lot of family. We have Cathcart, we have Jones, we have Smiths, we have Fords, we have Jets, we have Dunleavys, we have Hawns, we have Combs, we have Barker, we have Northcutt, we have Stacy, and many, 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 many other last names with a lot of extended family. A lot. I mean, if you jump into this rabbit hole with me, of all the people, you're going to start questioning who you might be dating or married to because of how many people we're related to. But when it comes to the last name Sanders, yes, there's a lot in the world. No, there's not a lot related to the Colonel left today. The ones left today, me, my grandpa, my uncle, my father. Those 4. And then you have my sister, you have my grandmother, and you have my stepmother. 7 total. And that's it. There's other people related to the Sanders that you could say is part of the Sanders family, yes. But that's it. And like the story with Joe Lettington, he never said that he was the step-nephew of the Colonel. He said he was the nephew. He's not related. He's related to Claudia Price, his second wife. He's his step-nephew. But people coined him as the nephew, which discredited me and anyone else who are actually nephews that wanted to say anything or share anything. You know how many people have come up to me and said, "You're not Joe Lettington. Joe Lettington is the nephew of the Colonel. You're not Joe Lettington." Because a lot of news sources said the only nephew, the Colonel's own nephew. No. Let's get it straight. The Colonel had a brother and a sister who had children. None of their last names were Lettington. Not even today. Joe Lettington is not in this family. We do not claim him. But there's people like him who put out false stories, such as a fake recipe and a false story behind it or exaggerated story for clout and attention. You notice none of the Colonel's blood-related family have actually come out, started bragging about being related, talking about this and that. I mean, James Sanders was the last one. He actually was the brand ambassador for KFC too. He was the last blood-related Sanders that was super proud of the relation to actually show off. Lee Cummings was as well. They were born around the same time. James was 1917. Lee was in the 1920s. Lee went on to start Famous Recipe and his own legacy with fried chicken and that side of the family. So between those two, they talked about it. But when they died, it wasn't really talked about much. You didn't see us in the news. You didn't see us on TV. You didn't see us writing books. You didn't see us doing anything with the brand. It just kind of went away. And here I am, I'm popping up, and I just got tired of seeing things. Like, I became a Kentucky Colonel for my work at a food pantry. I didn't know I could be a colonel, and I became a colonel. I became Colonel Sanders. KFC ads were disrespecting Uncle Harley, and people weren't realizing he was a real person or that he had family, so I started talking. Here we are today, and I'm a historian for the brand and my family. And ever since I started doing this stuff, and I'm proud of my relation, And after KFC made up with me, I am full, merchandise, full talk about this, full their food. Like I'm proud to be related to the brand now. And there's some mistakes that they make still, yes, but I'm proud to be related to them, seeing how they're working. They're welcoming into groups. I can see how the franchisees work. Like, this is a whole new thing for me, and I love it. And because of the stuff, the battle that I fought to get to this point to where KFC and I could sit down and talk, which we did in April, and to set the record straight on these rumors, set the record straight on people lying, the rest of the family that initially didn't want anything to do with it, not all the family, but some of the family that didn't want anything to do with it, they left it in the past, are getting excited with me and sharing their photos and stories with me to share with you guys. It's bringing family together. And although not all the families together, I don't think Joe Langton's ever going to want to be family, even though he's a step cousin of mine. Maybe not all the family would want to, but maybe in the future more of them will warm up to talking about their relation and connecting family through it and talking with the brand, just keeping the Colonel's legacy, what he stood for, what he had, what he created, alive through the family. Even if we're not doing it officially with the brand, just to stop all this bull crap going around. There's a lot of bull crap going around. So anyways, to sum up this entire video, I'm the last Sanders in the family line, unless somebody does a DNA test and I have a distant cousin hiding out there. That would be great. Colonel Sanders' brother is my 2 great-grandfather. Colonel Sanders is my 3 great-uncle. Colonel Sanders' brother is the only one who has family today with the last name Sanders. We're a direct line from the Colonel's brother.